Redwheel has grown considerably in just over 20 years. Out of London, Miami and Singapore, it manages over 18 billion euros invested in sustainable emerging markets, biodiversity, medical treatment, and the clean economy. Here in Davos, I sat down with CEO Tord Stallvik and Stephanie Kelly, head of Greenwheel, Redwheel's sustainable research platform and funds framework, to talk about targeted investing and the difference it can make. Okay, Tord and Stephanie, great to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
First of all, I've read, and why do you believe that 2024 will be a particularly important year for sustainable investing?
I think 24 will be the year where sustainable investing starts to grow up a little bit. What's happened in the last few years is that there was a big move into sustainable strategies, but most of those strategies we're really trying to lay a claim to sustainability by having, for example, a low carbon footprint in the underlying companies. That doesn't necessarily mean that the companies themselves are innovating in sustainability. It doesn't mean that they're actually helping move the needle on sustainability. And what we're seeing now is that as people have seen the correlation with growth funds, especially in 2022, recognizing that a lot of those funds were really growth funds and not sustainable funds, I think now it's the sort of time when people are saying, well, we have a dedication to this, but we need to find investment strategies where they're solving real problems, finding real solutions, and you're getting the growth opportunity, specifically from things that are working on sustainable solutions.
I've also seen listed on your literature autonomy, independence, and ownership. Why don't you tell us a bit about Redwheel in that context?
Autonomy, independence, and ownership are important because they help create alignment with the long-term goals. And if you're going to invest in sustainable strategies and back sustainable innovation, you really need to take a long-term view. This isn't something that you do on a 12 or 24-month view. And so structuring our business so that we are aligned with long-term outputs and the long-term targets of our clients is really critical. And by allowing our investment teams to develop their investment strategies autonomously without having someone telling them, the last 6 months performance wasn't that good, you need to change, I think that's critical because they're the ones that know, what is more likely to work in the long term. Likewise, being an independent organization, meaning that we don't have other people telling us what to do, we can again take those long-term views. And our ownership is private. We're owned by employees. And so again, underlines this idea of long-termism.
Okay, Stephanie, then, given what we've just talked about, talk about the role of new technologies and what role they will play in your investment strategies and in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. New technologies are really at the core of a lot of climate solutions. And I think that's really important. Not all technologies end up being successful in the long term, but being able to spot those really fundamental long-term structural game changers is a huge opportunity for investors. But sustainable investing, as it matures, isn't just going to be around those kind of new technologies driving climate solutions, though they are really important. It's also going to be about identifying what are the technologies today, what are the actions today that companies can use to decarbonize, particularly in harder to abate sectors where there are technologies today, there are ways to decarbonize that don't require some future technological breakthrough. And I think it's ultimately the investment opportunity is in both because there will be opportunities to identify winners in both spaces.
So what are we looking for? What kind of examples can you give me of the things that might catch your eye?
So I think we're really excited about the opportunities in the biodiversity space in particular. It's been one of those topics that has really recently come into the investor mindset, but actually probably should have been hand in hand with the climate conversation for the last decade, because fundamentally nature is related to climate, it affects climate, it is affected by climate, but there are really exciting technological solutions. There are really exciting new ways of both addressing issues like agriculture, so the use of AI in agriculture is a really exciting breakthrough we've seen over recent years, but you see it across the scope of the global economy. And I think that's one that we're really excited about.
So where does the concept of the circular economy fit into those discussions?
So I think this is really fundamental, right? The circular economy, in a really simple way, is just about reducing waste. And the amount of waste that the economy generates is absolutely huge, right? Consumerism, in the way that it's developed, creates a huge amount of waste. And that's where we're all familiar with the terms reduce, reuse, recycle. I think what a lot of people don't realize is they're not just random terms you can kind of interchangeably do recycle or reuse or reduce. They're actually an order of preference. You're supposed to reduce first, then reuse, then recycle. But that's only, again, it's an important part of the story, but it's not going to be the whole solution. And that's why you need to marry, sensibly using materials today with using new technologies to make new materials in the future that create less waste as well.
And those changes in behavior, those different ways of looking at how you exist as a corporate entity, as a company, those are conversations that you might have with potential clients. And there may be a meeting of minds, or there may be some persuasion or cajoling along the way.
Well, as investors, we do react to what opportunities are out there. And so I think we are more on the receiving end in terms of changes in consumer behavior, and we're observing that. And you clearly are seeing that across the world, that consumers want to live in a more sustainable way, and they want to invest their assets in a more sustainable way. But I do think it's important to underline what Stephanie talked about, is that it's not about funds that don't have a carbon footprint. It's about real things, things that are actually making a difference. And I think that's what this year is all about. I do think policy has a big role to play as well, because consumers may want to do something, but the policies need to be there to support changes.
But that is this age-old conversation about collaboration and the private sector and policymakers coming together and sort of singing from the same hymn sheet. But the conversation at the moment in a place like Davos is all about the private sector leading the charge, is it not?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the hope that the private sector, some fantastic innovation is going to help solve all the problems. And I think there will be some great innovations that will solve a lot of problems, but that's not enough. And I think, in the past few years, you've seen the geopolitical angle on this as well. I mean, energy security, is critical. And if you can develop renewable energy and you can give the support to, development of renewable energy, you are not dependent if you are, someone who's otherwise buying oil from countries that are invading other countries. You're not dependent on those countries for your, resources. And I think that's critical. So I think this is a real wake-up call. I mean, it's a problem anyway that was, long-term needed to be solved. But as you start to look at this through sort of a national security lens, you can see that it really is something that it requires policy responses.
I mean, Stephanie, in your field, we always thought of sustainability discussions as being more of an appeal than something that was necessarily tempting to an investor. But the economic arguments have caught up with that to an extent. Is it an easier space to operate in now than it was, say, 10 years ago? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I always say, for my sins, I'm an economist, right? And I look at this from that perspective. I think, in particular for investors, it's not just about, an ethical argument. I think sometimes that takes us back a little bit. Actually, these are structural changes, as Tord has talked about, in terms of the energy system we're going to operate in, and whatever timeline that ends up being, that investors need to take advantage of and also have a role to play in kind of encouraging, right? So I think that's really important. And then the other side of the coin is completely that without these changes, without seeing decarbonisation, without seeing protection of nature, without seeing sustainable development in emerging markets, we won't have investment opportunities to make in 50 to 100 years, because the earth itself will be so unstable. And it's often really underestimated that actually, ecosystem services, nature, the flow of benefits that we get from nature are absolutely fundamental to economic growth and the financial markets that we're investing in.
So final thought then, Tord, Redwheel positioning itself at a time where you feel that there's a momentum that's representing a shift in the way things are moving, in the way people are conducting their economies, however which lens you want to look through. What's your sense about the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, we look at it, I guess, from our perspective as a specialist investor, that we have structured ourselves in a way that we can be relevant to all of these transitions that need to happen, these opportunities that are going to come up, and being able to be a good partner to our investors, to be there for the long term, to help them achieve their financial goals while investing in these innovations, and actually also companies that help us adapt to the environment that we're in, I think is an important angle on this as well.
Okay, Tord Stallvik and Stephanie Kelly, thanks very much indeed, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.